Hello class, welcome to General Mathematics. So in this video, we are going to discuss about one-to-one and inverse function. Our objectives for today is to represent real-life situations using one-to-one functions, determine the inverses of one-to-one function, graph inverse function, determine the domain and range of inverse function, and then solve problems involving the applications of inverse functions. So let us first go back to our mapping diagrams and try to determine which of these diagrams, given diagrams, are functions, so represents a function. Okay, so from these diagrams, we know from the correspondence, from the definition of the different correspondence, that only diagrams and diagrams 1 and 2 can be classified as a function. So between these two diagrams, alin naman kaya dito yung merong one-to-one relationship? So between diagram 1 and diagram 2, only diagram 1 has a one-to-one relationship. So as you can see here, diba, one value in the x only corresponds to one value in y, and one value in y only corresponds to one value in x, unlike in our diagram 2 where the relationship is many to one. Since if we look at this, the values of x, there are two values in our input that which corresponds to only one value in y. So 2 corresponds to 5, and then 3 also corresponds to 5. So therefore, diagram 1 is the only diagram in our given that has one-to-one relationship. And since we classified it as a function, therefore it is a function with one-to-one relationship. So from this example, we can now define our one-to-one function. So the definition of one-to-one function, sabi dito, a function f is one-to-one if whenever x of 1 is not equal to x of 2, f of x of 1 is not equal to f of x of 2. So ano kayang ibig sabihin nito? Yan, so ito muna tayo. So for example, meron tayong equation dito, or meron tayong function dito, which is ganyan. So x plus 2. So gagawa tayo ng table of values, for example. And then maglalagay tayo dito ng 1, maglalagay tayo dito ng 2. Okay, so ang ibig sabihin nito, if x of 1 is not equal to x of 2, dapat ang f of x niya, so f of x niya or y values na is not equal to each other. So dito sa example natin, meron tayo ditong expression ng ating function. So for example, this is f of x is equal to x plus 2. So yung x of 1 natin is 1, x of 2 natin is 2. If we substitute and evaluate this function using this value of x, 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. So whenever the value of x changes, dapat nagbabago din yung value ng y. And there are no repetition of y values. So, for example, si 2, kapag in-input mo siya dito sa function, hindi na siya pwede mag-resolve to 3 kasi yun na yung value ni 1. So, meron na siyang, So, that is, if this is the case, then our function can be defined as a one-to-one function. So, dito naman, sabi dito, so whenever x of 1 is equal to x of 2, f of x of 1 is equal to f of x of 2. So, for example, x of 1. Mali pala. Okay, so yan. For example, x of 1 natin is 1, and then ang x of 2 natin is 1 pa rin. So, x of 1 and x of 2 have the same value. So, therefore, if we input it here, so pareho pa rin ang sagot nila. So, 3. So, whenever x of 1 is equal to x of 2, dapat ang value niya, ang f of x niya or ang y value na is also the same. So, yun ang ibig sabihin nitong definition na to. So, yan. So, that is, the same y value is never paired with two different x values. So in our definition of a function, sabi natin, an input value will only correspond to a unique, one and only unique y value. So, value in our range. So, kapag 1 to 1 naman, aside from each x values corresponds to y, only one value in y, kapag sa 1 to 1 function naman, kasama na din dun yung each values in the range only corresponds to one value in our x. So therefore, meron tayong unique pairing. So, hindi mo siya pwedeng ikaparehas sa ibang numbers. One of the simplest way to test whether a given function or given function is a one-to-one function is by using the horizontal line test. So, let us first recall yung ating VLT. So, diba, sabi natin, VLT can help us determine whether a function is a one-to-one, is a function, whether an equation is a function or a graph is a function. So, for example, I have here two graphs. Yan, graph number 1 and then ito, graph number 2. So, if I run a VLT here, so let me use another color here. So, if I run here a vertical line test, ayan. So, dapat, if it is a function, so by running or by performing a vertical line test, the line will only intersect the graph at one point. So, in both cases, these two graphs passed our vertical line. Kasi kung titingnan mo dito, ito, isa lang naman yung dadaanan nitong vertical line test. However, pagdating naman sa horizontal line test, sabi dito, a function y is equal to f of x is 1 to 1 if and only if no horizontal line intersects the graph of y equals f of x in more than one point. So, let's draw a horizontal line. So, asan na ba tayo? Ayan. Let's do a horizontal line. And so, dito, this is still this graph is a representation of 1 to 1. Kasi, when we run a horizontal line test, it only intersects. So, whether dito ka mag-drawing ng ating horizontal line o dito ka mag-run ng ating horizontal line test, the line will only intersect this graph at one point. But, if we perform horizontal line test in our second graph, so as you can see here, meron na tayo dito. It passes 2 points of our graph. So, therefore, this one is not one-to-one function. So, although it is a function, pero hindi siya one-to-one. Kasi meron siyang value that corresponds to, meron siyang ang tawag dito, one y value that corresponds to 2 x's. Okay, so let's have an example. So, the function y is equal to x squared minus 4x plus 7. So, ito yung graph niya. Andito yung graph. So, if we run a horizontal line test here, so for example, nag-drawing tayo ng line sa y is equal to 7. So, makikita mo na dito sa graph na to, it will intersect our horizontal line will intersect the graph at 2 points. So, yung first point natin is 0, 7, and then yung second point is 4, 7. So, therefore, this function is not one-to-one, since it intersects the graph at 2 points. So, let's have another example. So dito sa dalawa, we have here y is equal to x cubed, and then y is equal to x cubed plus 3x squared minus x minus 1. So alin dito ang function, alin ang hindi? So A is a one-to-one function and B is not a one-to-one function. So although pareho silang function, pero hindi sila parehong one-to-one function. So dito, only A is a one-to-one and B is not a one-to-one kasi yung horizontal line test natin, makikita natin there are the graph is intersected at 3 points. So although dito, for example, kung magdodrawing ako ng line dito sa taas, for example, asa na? So kung magdodrawing ako dito ng line, dyan isa lang. Pero pagdating dito, ayan, so madami na. So, meron na tayong 3 lines dito. So, therefore, this is not a one-to-one, itong letter B natin. At mapapansin nyo, class, so dito, pareho silang cubic function. So, polynomial function, and then this is a cubic function. So, ito, cubic function din ito. So, depende din, class, sa number of terms ng ating function. So, depende din doon ang shape ng ating graph. Kasi diba nagta-transform ang itsura ng ating graph depende sa number of terms, depende sa type of function, and then depende sa number of terminologies ng ating equation. So dito, although pareho silang cubic function, yung isa, since it is composed of of these terms, yan, so meron tayong 3x squared minus x minus 1. So since this one, ang graph niya is ganyan, hindi siya na-define as a one-to-one function. So, ibig sabihin, class, it is really important for you to create a graph para ma-identify mo kung yung function na ba yun is considered as one-to-one. So, here, ayan. So, state whether each relation whose graph is given is one-to-one or not. So, you may pause this video and then go back after, play this video after you answered. Okay, so for number 1, if we perform in our, so if we perform a horizontal line test for number 1, may kita natin, So, may kita natin na it will intersect this graph at 2 points. So, therefore, this is not one-to-one function. So, ito naman sa number 2, kapag nag-run tayo ng horizontal line test, it will only intersect the graph at 1 point. So, therefore, this is a one-to-one function. So, our graph 3 naman, so nakikita natin na all, ito horizontal na to, it intersects many. So, infinitely intersects our x. Madaming x. So, therefore, this is not one-to-one. So, constant functions are not one-to-one functions. Kahit i-restrict mo pa yung domains and range niya, constant function cannot be defined as one-to-one function. So, all functions satisfy the vertical line test, but only one-to-one functions satisfy both the vertical and horizontal line test. So, for a function to be one-to-one, the inverse of the function must also define a function. So, di ba ginagamit natin yung horizontal and vertical line test to see whether a whether an equation is a function. So here, so, for example, itong quadratic natin, yung itong block natin na graph. So, if we run here a vertical line test, so this graph is a function. However, if we get its inverse, so itong color blue na graph, if we run a vertical line test, may kita natin na yung inverse nitong y is equal to ax squared natin is not a function kasi it intersects, the vertical line test intersects the graph at 2 points. So, yung horizontal line test naman, so, if we perform a horizontal line test in in our second graph, so itong sa color blue, may kita natin na itong function natin, itong inverse function natin, itong color blue, is a function. However, if we run a horizontal line test sa sa inverse niya, which is this quadratic function, may kita natin that the inverse is not a function kasi ayan, so meron siyang, so based on the HLT, it is not a function because the horizontal line passes through 2 points. So therefore, for a function to be one-to-one, the inverse of the function must also define a function. So every function y is equal to f of x has an inverse relation. So x is equal to f of y. So yan ang relation nila. So yan. Kung ang y is equal to f of x, ang x is equal to f of y, or the function of y. Okay, so suppose we have here an absolute function. So y is equal to the absolute of x plus 1. So let's map the relation between the domain and the range. So yan, ang ordered pairs niya, may kita natin dito sa ordered pairs. We have negative 2, negative 1, negative 2, 3, negative 1, 2, 0, 1, 1, 2, and then 2, 3. So the inverse of this function, ayan, so the inverse relation of this function is x is equal to absolute value of y minus x. So if we map the diagram, pabaliktad naman yung ating arrow diagram kasi dito sa inverse relation, ang nagiging input natin is si value of y. So 3, pag ni-input natin siya dito sa function na to, it will result to 2 values. So 3 will result to 2 and then positive 2, negative 2. And then si 2 then it results to 1 and then negative 1. So since yung input natin dito, diba kasi ayan na yung input natin dito is y. So yung input natin corresponds to 2 values. So therefore, the inverse relation here is not a function. So ayan. So the inverse relation is not a function. So kung titignan natin, ito yung inverse. And ito na yung set of ordered pairs. So kung titignan natin dito, asa na tayo? Okay, so kung titignan nyo dito, meron ditong madodoble. So, ayan, si 3, si 2, ayan, si 3 tapos si 3, ayan, tapos si 2 and then 2. So, dalawa yung value ng domain natin, and then, yung range, yung dalawa ang value ng domain that corresponds to, yung value ng domain natin corresponds to two different value of the range natin. So, dito kasi sa inverse, ito ang ating domain, ito ang ating range. So, pinagbaliktad lang. So, inverse nga ng ating original function. So, the ordered pairs of the function f are reversed to produce the ordered pairs of the inverse relation. So, example. So, given the function f is equal to 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 4, 2, its domain is 1, 2, 3, 4, and its range is 1, 2, 3. So, if we get the inverse relation of this function, ang magiging domain ng ating inverse function, so ang magiging domain niya is magiging siyang 1, 2, and 3. And then yung range niya, yun naman yung 1, 2, 3, 4. Ay, sorry. Okay. So, magiging siyang 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So, this is our range for domain and range for this inverse relation. Okay, so state whether each relation whose graph is given is one-to-one or not. Okay. So, ang ating number 1, so kung babaliktarin natin ito, so makikita natin dito na sa inverse ng ating sa inverse ng relation R, yung inverse niya, meron tayong nadodoble. So, there are repetition of our domain. So, merong repetition of 7 and repetition of 6. So, therefore, this is not 1-to-1. Yan. For number 2, so number 2 is not a function kasi ayan na nga. Oh. This is not a function. Not 1-to-1 din. Not 1-to-1. Number 3, so if we get the inverse relation of this 3, this is not also 1-to-1. Kasi, ayan, may repetition tayo ng ating domain. So, if we get the inverse of this, so 1, 6, may siyang 6, 1. 2, 5, may siyang 5, 2. Negative 5, 4, may siyang 4, negative 5. 3, negative 2, may siyang negative 2, 3. And then 8, 6, may siyang 6, 8. So, yung inverse relation niya is given by this set of ordered pairs. And then, if we look at the set of ordered pairs, there is a repetition of in the domain. So, yung 6 natin na doble. So, therefore, this is not 1-to-1. So, ayan. So, this is not 1-to-1. So, the importance of 1-to-1 function is that it defines a second function. That is the inverse function. So, inverse function is a relation reversing the process performed by 1-to-1 function. Okay, so today we are battling against the coronavirus. So many of the countries developed a vaccine. So for example, we have Moderna, we have Pfizer, we have Sinovac, and many other brands of vaccines developed by different pharmaceutical companies. So although we have vaccines already, not all countries naka-receive agad ng vaccine. So, for example, South Africa, hindi agad sila naka-receive ng vaccine. So, what they did is they tried to create their own vaccine. And how did they do that? So, by studying the components, the composition of Moderna. So, ang ginawa nila is they reversed engineer the composition of Moderna so para makita nila kung paano ba ginawa si Moderna. So therefore, since they reverse engineer it, so they need to analyze, they need to undo whatever the company of the Moderna does para makagawa sila ng vaccine. So they undo it in order to understand the process. So this is the same concept of how inverse function works. So inverse function undo the process of 1-to-1 function. So whatever the 1-to-1 function does to the input in order to produce an output, the inverse function undo the process in order to look for the value of that input. So in this lesson, you need to review on the concept of the inverse properties of addition and multiplication. So first, let's have our additive inverse. So the inverse of addition is subtraction. So for example, if I have here a number, so 5 plus 3 is equal to 8. So what if so this is my original number, by the way. So what if I want to return this number to this original number? Anong kailangan kong gawin? So for me to go back to my original number, since nag-add ako dito ng 3, therefore kailangan ko mag-subtract ng 3 to get the original value. So this is the additive inverse, wherein ang inverse ng ating addition ay subtraction. And likewise, ang inverse ng subtraction, for example, 15 minus 5 is equal to 10. So para makabalik ako sa 15, so 10, and then since nag-subtract ako dito, I will add 5. So plus 5 is equal to 15. So that is the inverse. So the undone, it's what is done by they undo the process of the other function, the one-to-one function. So if I have here y is equal to x plus 3, therefore in order for me to get the value of x, suppose y na ang given, so to get the value of x, ang gagawin ko is, since nag-add ako dito ng 3 and this is the result, I need to subtract 3, and then that will be my inverse. That will be the way on how to look for my original value. So next, inverse property is the inverse property of multiplication. So multiplicative inverse. So the inverse of multiplication is division. So for example, 15, then 15, so for example, dito 5 times 3 is equal to 15. So yan ang aking result. So if I want to go back to 5, for example, then what I need to do is to, since nag-multiply ako dito ng 3, so ang inverse ng multiplication is division. So we need to divide by 3 so that 15 divided by 3 is equal to 5. So ganun din sa division. So for example, 20 divided by 4 is equal to 5. So para makabalik ako sa 20, makuha ko yung aking original value. Then, since nag-divide ako ng 4 dito, mag-multiply ako ng 4 para makuha ko yung 20. So that is our multiplicative inverse. So ilagay natin sa function. So for example, y is equal to 3 3x. Okay, so to get the value of x, I need to divide both side by 3 kasi ito di ba, we multiplied. So ang inverse ng multiplication is division. So x now is equal to y divided by 3. So kung makikita nyo, familiar na kayo dito sa process na to, especially kapag in-apply nyo na siya sa mga physics problems, for example, or other problems. So in business math, for example, or in other subjects na nag-involve ng derivations and calculations. So you're already familiar with this process. So here, we're just going to look, at the pure mathematics side of this concept. So to define an inverse function, so here is the definition. So first, if the function f is a set of ordered pairs, x and y, then the inverse of f is the set of ordered pairs y and x. So example, so dito diba sa ating example, ang ating function, so our function f is defined by the relation between a person and then their birthday. So for example, si Zoro birthday niya November 7, si Sanji birthday niya March 2, si Luffy birthday niya May 5. So if we get the inverse of this function, okay, so the inverse of this function, ang gagawin natin, so sabi dito, di ba, the ordered pairs of our inverse is y, x. It is, so by interchanging the ordered pairs of our original function. So since dito ang ating x value here is 0, pagdating sa ating inverse, yung x natin dito will become the domain. Yung domain ng ating original function will become the range of our inverse, while the range ng ating original function becomes the domain of our inverse. So, binaliktad lang natin. We interchange x and y. So, the domain of inverse function is the range of the original function, and then the range of the inverse function is the domain of the original function. So, yan na. So, if f and g are inverses of each other, then yung domain of f, which is x and y, kapag kinuha natin yung kapag dinefine natin yung domain ng ating inverse function g, so ang domain niya is y and x. That is if f and g are inverses of each other. Take note also that the inverse function notation is ayan. So, f raised to negative 1. So, we use this when we are finding the inverse. So, ginagamit natin siya for looking the inverse of a function. Second definition. So, if f is a one-to-one function with domain x and range y, and g is a function with domain y and range x, then g is the inverse of function f if and only if f composed of g of x is equal to x for all x in the domain of g, and g composed of f of x is equal to x for all x in the domain of f. So, itong definition na to, as well as the other definition, defines the properties of inverse function. So, later, we will use this to prove whether the given functions are inverses of each other. So, for now, let us look at how to find the inverse of a one-to-one function given an equation. So, the steps on finding the inverse of one-to-one function given an equation is first replace f of x with y, interchange x and y, solve for y in terms of x, and then replace y with the inverse notation. So, let us have these following examples. So, you can pause this video and then go back after answering this. Okay, so to answer number 1, so f of x is equal to x minus 6. So, step number 1, replace f of x with y. So, ayan, papalitan natin to with y. And then, second step, interchange natin yung x and y. So, dito, y is equal to x minus 6. Dito, ang gagawin na natin dito is x is equal to y minus 6. Step number 3, solve for y in terms of x. So, yung y natin, ayan na. So, dito, yung equation natin dito, yung function natin dito is x is equal to y minus 6. So, to solve for y, i-transpose lang natin ito. Ilipat lang natin. So, the inverse of subtraction is addition. So, yan. So, mag-add lang tayo ng 6 sa kabila. And then, para matanggal natin si 6 dito sa part ni y. So, ayan na. So, therefore, ayan na. Ang ating final answer. So, step 4, replace y with the inverse notation. So, ang ating final answer is this one. So, the inverse function is equal to x plus 6. So, this is the inverse of f of x is equal to x minus 6. For number 2, step 1, ayan. So, replace ulit natin yan. Yung x, yung f of x, replace natin ng y. And then, interchange natin si x and y. So, therefore, magiging siyang x is equal to 2y plus 1. And then, solve for y in terms of x. So, dito class, ang una nating ginawa is to transpose. So, yan. So, mas madali yung unang gawin natin is kapag may addition and subtraction, first thing is transpose nyo na yung expression, yung terms na in-add ninyo. For example, this is an expression, for example, i-transpose nyo na sa kabila. And then, ayan. So, may siyang x minus 1 equals 2y. So, isolate natin si y kasi we need to solve for y in terms of x. So, si y, para matanggal natin si 2, this is multiplication. So, the inverse of multiplication is division. So, divide both sides by 2. So, that will get, ayan, so, y is equal to x minus 1 divided by 2. Replace y with the inverse notation. So, this will be our final answer. So, this is the inverse of 2x plus 1. Okay. Okay, so number 3. So, number 3, f of x is equal to x minus 2 divided by 2x plus 3. So, first step ulit natin is y is equal, so i-ano natin, replace natin yung f of x with y. So, magiging siyang y is equal to x minus 2 divided by 2x plus 3. So, interchange the x and y. So that we'll have this equation, function. And then, solve for y in terms of x. So, ayan. So, dito, dinivide natin siya, both sides. Dinivide natin siya dito. So, ang inverse nito is to multiply. Ayan. So, multiply natin siya. So, x times 2y plus 3. And then, distributive property. So, 2x times 2y is 2xy. X times 3 is 3x is equal to y minus 2. So, since we need to solve for y dito, diba? So, we need to ang tawag dyan, we need to simplify our equation. So, ayan. So, pinagsama natin dito si y, 2x minus y. So, andito si y, pinagsama natin dito yung like terms. So, 2xy minus y is equal to negative 3x minus 2. So, yan, transpose natin. And then, yan, sinimplify natin para mailabas natin si y. And then, so since this is multiplication, the inverse niya is division. So, divide both sides by 2x minus 1. So that our y will become y is equal to negative 3x minus 2 divided by 2x minus 1. And the step 4 natin is to, ayan, replace y with the inverse notation. So, ito ngayon yung inverse ng ating 1-to-1 function. So, negative 3x minus 2 divided by 2x minus 1 is the inverse of x minus 2 divided by 2x plus 3. So, how about this one? So, f of x is equal to x squared minus 9. So, diba, this is a quadratic function. So, alam naman natin na kapag quadratic ang function natin, ang graph niya is ganito. So, parabola. So, depende. So, kunyari, sumakto dyan. So, parabola. So, ibig sabihin, if we perform here a horizontal line, tapos hindi siya papasa. So, therefore, this is not a 1-to-1 function. But, class, you can still identify this as a 1-to-1 if and only if we restrict the value of its domain. So, for example, diba, yung standard natin, so standard quadratic function natin is y is equal to x squared. So, ang graph ng x squared, ang vertex niya is nasa 0, 0. Ayan. Nasa 0, 0. So, for this equation, so for x squared to be considered 1-to-1, we limit its domain to either x is greater than or equal to 0, para ito lang yung i-consider natin, or x is less than or equal to 0, para yan lang ang i-consider natin. So, depende rin naman yan sa equation ng ating quadratic, kasi diba meron tayong vertex. So, vertex. So, that's why in your book, in your module, I include there, instead of x is equal to greater than or equal to 0, ang linagay ko doon is dapat you restrict it to domains, which is so you restrict it to the domain depende sa value ng inyong vertex. So, for example, ang vertex nito is 0, 9. So, yan. So, 0, 9 ang vertex nito. So, therefore, ito ang applied natin. So, ang x nito, ang domain nito, must be x is greater than or equal to 0 or x. So, kapag grinap mo kasi itong isa, ayan. So, ito lang siya. Ay, wait lang. Mali. So, kapag grinap mo ito, ayan. So, for example, this is 9. So, for example, this is 9. So, ang graph niya is from this point only, papunta doon. Ngayon, ito naman, kapag graph mo ito, ayan. So, kung ito ay 9, so from this point, papunta naman dito. So, if we run a horizontal line test dito, ano yan? Papasa siya. So, papasa to. Wala yan dito kasama. So, that is if we restrict the value of our domain. So, for the solution of this equation, ayan. So, yan yun. So, nasa module nyo na yan. So, the inverse of this function is, ayan. So, f raised to negative 1 of x is equal to the square root of x plus 9. So, restrict lang natin yung value ng ating domain. So, yan na. So, when finding the inverse of a quadratic, we have to limit its domain on which the function is 1 to 1. Excuse me. So, what are the properties of inverse functions? For example, we are given two functions, f and then g. So, how do we verify? I verify whether f and g are inverses of each other. So, paano natin ma-verify? So, we need to adhere or base our decision sa property of inverse function. So, that is given by the definition of the inverse. So, given a 1-to-1 function, f of x and its inverse, f negative 1 of x, then the following are true. So, number 1, the inverse of f raised to negative 1 of x is f of x. Number 2, so f composed of f raised to negative 1 of x raised to negative 1 of x is equal to x for all x in the domain of f raised to negative 1. And then f raised to negative 1 of f of x is equal to x for all x in the domain of f. So, kung nakikita nyo, nakakalito yung definition niya. So, ano lang naman yan? So, ang ibig sabihin lang naman ito. So, for example, if f and g are inverses, if f, so for number 1, if the inverse of f is g, then the inverse of g must be also f. So, yun. So, kung ang inverse ni f is si g, dapat ang inverse ni g is f. So, how do we know? So, how do we prove whether they are the inverses of each other? That is by performing this property number 2 and number 3. And kung makikita nyo dito, this is a composition of function. So, composition siya of function. So, the inverse function is an inverse with respect to the operation of composition of function. So, review nyo na lang yung andun sa So, kung nalilito pa rin kayo, review the operation on function sa composition. So, if f is a 1-to-1 function and g is the inverse of the function f, then the following must be true. So, when we solve for f composed of g of x, which can be written also in this manner, dapat ang sagot niya is x for all x in the domain of g. And then g composed of f of x is equal to g of f of x. Dapat ang sagot din dito is equal to x for all x in the domain of f. So, let us have some examples para maintindihan natin dito. So, f and g, sabi dito, verify that f and g or functions f and g are the inverses of each other. So, property number 1 natin. So, balik tayo. Property number 2. So, dapat, if we perform this composition of function, ang sagot niya is x. So, sagutan natin. So, dito natin ilagay. So, yung una, f composed of g of x must be equal to x. And then, yung property number 3 natin is g composed of f of x is equal to x. Dapat pareho silang magiging equal sa x. Okay, so ito, we can write this in this manner. So, f composed of g of x is equal to ito. So, yung equation ng f of x natin is 2x plus 1. So, since ang value ng ating x here is g of x, ayan, so, expression. So, we substitute this one with our value of g of x. So, x minus 1 over 2 is equal to 2. So, itong x, lahat ng x na variable sa ating equation, papalitan natin ito. X minus 1 over 2 plus 1. So, ito, cancel natin si 2. So, x minus 1 over 2 is equal to x minus 1 plus 1. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So, therefore, x minus 1 over 2 is equal to x. So, dito, diba, ito yung first property natin. So, dapat, if f is composed of its inverse, therefore, ang sagot niya is x. And this is true to all the domains of the inverse. So, i-check natin dito. Kasi, yan. So, dito naman sa kabila. So, dapat, if we perform this composition, if g is composed of f, of function f, therefore, ang sagot din niya dapat is x, para masabi natin na inverse siya ng ating function, given function. So, g composed of f of x is equal to x minus 1 over 2. So, anong value ni f of x? So, we have here 2x plus 1. G, 2x plus 1 is equal to, palitan natin si x, 2x plus 1 minus 1 over 2. So plus positive 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So, therefore, g, 2 of x plus 1 is equal to 2x over 2. Eliminate si 2. Cancel natin si 2. And then, g composed of 2x plus 1 is equal to x. So, this also meet our property number 3. So, if g is composed of f of x, dapat ang sagot din niya is x. So, nakita naman natin that when we perform composition of functions where our g of x with this given equation is composed of this function f, so ang sagot din niya is x. So, since both of them resulted to x, therefore, f and g are inverses of each other. Okay. So, for this item, so try nyo sagutan itong item natin. And then, after answering, go back in this video to verify whether your answer is correct. Okay, so let's answer. So, first, we have here f of g of x must be equal to x. That is property number 2. So, let us now perform composition of function. So, f composed of g of x is equal to 3x plus 6. So, what is the value of our g of x? Ang value ng g of x natin is 1/3 x minus 2. So, f 1/3 x minus 2 is equal to 3, and then 1/3 x minus 2 plus 6. So, dito, ito class, marami din ditong nagkakamali. So, kapag imumultiply mo siya sa expression, you need to perform distributive property of multiplication. So, wag ko na itong isulat muna. So, ayan, para magkasya. So, yan, 3 times 1/3 x is equal to x. Kasi maka-cancel out yan. So, 3 times negative 2 is equal to negative 6 plus 6. So, f composed of 1/3 x minus 2. Ayan. So, f of 1/3 x minus 2 is equal to negative 6 plus 6 is 0, therefore x. So, tama siya. So, nag-equal siya sa x. How about this one? So, for property number 3, let's perform a composition of function where g is composed of f yan, of x is equal to x. Yan ang property number 3 natin. So, g composed of f of x is equal to 1/3 x minus 2. So, ito, value ni f of x natin is 3x plus 6 is equal to 1/3. Substitute natin itong x dito with 3x plus 6 minus 2. So, 1/3 times 3x. So, 1/3 times 3x is equal to x, and then 1/3 times 3 times positive 6 is equal to 6 divided by 3 is 2 minus 2. So, g of 3x plus 6 is equal to 2 minus 2, ay positive 2 minus 2 is 0, therefore x. So, therefore, pareho silang nag-result sa x. So, this function are inverse of each other. Okay. So, now, let us now talk about the graph of the inverse of function. So, sabi dito, the graph of the inverse is the reflection of the graph of the original function about the line y is equal to x. So, ang y is equal to x natin is ito. So, makikita nyo, if y is equal to 0, x is equal to 0. If y is equal to 1, x is equal to 1, and so on. So, this is the line of symmetry for the graph of the inverse. So, dapat, ang graph of inverse is a reflection of the original function with respect to this line. Okay, so these are the following steps. So, identify the domain and range of the original function, make table of values, then evaluate the function, sketch the graph of the original function, find the inverse of the function, find the domain and range, make a table of values for the inverse function, and then sketch the graph of the inverse on the same plane with respect to the y is equal to x line. Okay, so let us have this example. So, so it is example to. Yan, example. So, for example, find the inverse of f of x is equal to 2x plus 1 and graph them in one coordinate plane. So, first step is to determine the domain and range of our original function. So, if we are going to determine this one, so go back to your module, refresher module for the domain and range para ma-recall nyo kung paano maghanap ng domain and range. So, dito, so to look for the value, we need to solve for x in terms of y and then solve for y in terms of x. So, if we perform that, makikita natin na yung yung equation natin will be both polynomial function. So, hindi ko na ipapakita dito yung process nito. So, yung result nito, kapag nag-solve ka ng y in terms of x, polynomial. So, for example, 2x plus 1 is polynomial. Kapag nag-solve ka ng x in terms of y, so, ayan, magiging x is equal to y minus 1 over 2. So, yung y minus 1 over 2 is also a polynomial. So, therefore, the domain and range, since both are polynomial, ang domain and range are the element of real numbers. Wala naman tayong nilagay na restriction. So, the domain and range of the original function 2x plus 1 are all the elements of real numbers. So, step number 2 is to make a table of values, then evaluate. Hindi ko na ipapakita yung pag-evaluate dito. So, you know how to evaluate. So, pag nag-evaluate tayo, substitute natin yung given values of x doon sa equation and then perform the operation. Okay, so, since ang domain and range natin is the element of real numbers, so kahit anong value ang ilagay mo sa domain, sa x, kahit anong piliin mong value of x, pwede, kasi element of real numbers, all elements of real numbers. So, suppose ito ang pinili natin. Negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So, kung papalitan natin si f of x is equal to 2x plus 1, palitan natin evaluate natin siya at f of negative 3. So, 2 times negative 3 plus 1 is equal to negative 6 plus 1 is equal to negative 5. Yan. So, yun ang value ng y. And then, do the same for all the values. Yan. So, evaluate nyo. So, make table of values. Mamili kayo ng anong values ang ilalagay nyo as value of x. So, now that we have our values, table of values, we can now graph this equation. So, based on our created table of values. So here, if we plot these points in our graph, then, ayan. So, andyan siya. So, ito si negative 3, 5. This is negative 2, negative 3, negative 1, negative 1, 0, 1, 1, 3, 2, 5, and 3, 7. So, this is the graph of f of x is equal to 2x plus 1. So, the graph of our original function. Step number 4 is to find the inverse. So, meron na tayo. So just follow the steps on how to find the inverse of a function, and then you'll get that the inverse of 2x plus 1 is equal to x minus 1 divided by 2. Ayan. So, find the domain and range of our inverse function. So, to look for the domain and range of the inverse, you just simply, so sabi natin kanina sa definition natin, the inverse ay the domain of the inverse function is the range of our original function. So, di ba, ang domain ng ating original function, f of x is equal to 2x plus 1, ang domain niya is x such that x is the element of real number. And its range is that y such that y is element of real number. So, since, ayan yung natin, so, pag interchange mo lang, so, since pareho naman element of real number. So, just that, so, yung range ng ating original function will become the domain, and then the domain of our original function will become the range of our, this is the inverse. So, for the inverse. So, since that is the case, so for interchanging, so kapag gagawa naman tayo ng table of values, para hindi na tayo mahirapan maghanapan ng mga values, pagpalit na lang natin tong dalawa. So, the domain, so the range of our original function here, so the range of our original function will become the domain of our inverse function. So, since ang range niya, ang pinili nating values, ito yung nakuha natin na values, then let us use that as the value of our, as the domain of our inverse. And then, if you use these values to evaluate this function, then you will arrive to this result. So, kung makita nyo, kapag plinag nyo to, kapag sinubstitute nyo tong mga values na to, for example, negative 5 minus 1 divided by 2, it will result to negative 3. So, kung makikita nyo, this is a reflection ng ating original function. So, since they are inverses of each other and they reflect each other, so, ayan. Then, ang graph nila is also a reflection of each other. So, sketch the graph of the inverse function in the same plane with our original function. So, ayan yung ating original function and this is our graph. So, ayan yung mga points niya. And then, ito. So, ipakita nyo yung line of symmetry. So, ating y is equal to x. So, if we examine here, for example, zoom natin dito sa part na to. So, ito, diba, this is 0, 1. This point is 0, this point is 1, 0. So, ang reflection niya, kung ibabalik na rin natin yung 1, 0, if we interchange 1, 0, magiging siyang 0, 1. So, ito, 0, 1. So, hindi ko pala nalagyan ng points dito. By the way, dito na lang tayo sa kamali pa yung nalagyan kong points. So, dito na sa kabila na lang. So, dito, diba, for example, for our original function, the coordinate of this point, so from our table of values, the coordinate of this point is negative 2, kasi 1, 2, negative 2, negative 3. So, ang reflection niya is if we interchange negative 2, negative 3, it will become negative 3, negative 2. So, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 2. So, yan ang reflection niya. And that is true to all the points of the line. So, the graph of the one-to-one and the inverse function are symmetrical with respect to line y is equal to x. Okay, so try to graph the inverse of this given graph. So, given this graph, try to draw the inverse of this. Okay, so you may pause and then go back after you answer para makita nyo yung sagot. So, if we are to graph the inverse of this given graph, given function, then we'll get this one. So, itong isa, diba, this is a cubic function. So, this is a cubic function. So, wait lang. So, this is a cubic function siya, diba? So, pero hindi ko alam yung, hindi ko matandaan yung equation. So, this is a cubic function. So, ang inverse ng cubic function is, ayan, yung, yung radical. Ayan tawag dito. Radical function siya with 3 as its index. So, for example, sa x squared, ang inverse niya is square root. Cube root. So, ito, nakalimutan ko yung tawag. So, ang inverse ng cubic function is cube root. Yan, cube root function. Ang inverse ng square root function is, ng quadratic function is square root function. Ayan. So, just to recall. So, if we plot this, paano natin nakuha? So, dito, diba, ang ating original function, meron tayong, 2, 7. So, anong inverse ng 2, 7? So, we have here, 5, 6, 7, and then 2. 7, 2. So, they reflect each other. So, ito 2, 7, ito 7, 2. So, ito, yung original natin is 1, 0, dito 0, 1. So, ito naman, we have 0, negative 1. Ito, 1, negative 1, 0. Ito naman, this is negative 1, negative 2. So, ang reflection niya is negative 2, negative 1. So, ito, negative 2, negative 1. So, dito naman, we have here 2, negative 2, and then negative 9. So, dito, ang reflection niya dapat is negative 9, negative 2. So, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2. So, dapat, they are symmetrical about the line of symmetry, which is y is equal to x. So, yan. So, yan yung ating graph ng ating inverse function. So, if given is equation, then perform the steps given. And then, if given is just this one, then you may just identify the points and then draw the graph. So, you need to review on the shapes of the graph. So, dapat kapag nakita nyo na yung function, for example, alam nyo na dapat yung shape ng graph nila, and then on how to graph them. So, that is already taught in your junior high school. So, dun sa mga previous na modules na binigay ko sa inyo, meron na dun ng mga videos to refresh as a reviewer on how to graph different functions. So, yun. So, how about the domain and the range of the inverse? So, sabi natin that the domain of the inverse is the range of the 1 to 1, and the range of the inverse is the function, is the domain of the 1 to 1. So, if f and g are inverse of each other, yun na nga. So, the domain, if domain of f is x, then sa g, ang domain niya is y. So, yun. So, we interchange the value of the domain and ranges of the inverses. Okay, so for example, so if this is our original function with the domain x such that x is greater than or equal to -2 but less than or equal to 1.5, and then with range is equal to y such that y is greater than or equal to -3 and less than or equal to 4, then the domain and range of our inverse of this function is the yung kabaliktaran nito. So, interchange of this two. The interchange of the domain and range of our original. So, therefore, the domain and range of our function dito, our inverse function is, ayan. So, ito ang domain, ito yung magiging range niya. But since we defined domain as an input value, as an independent value, ang tawag dyan, ang nagre-represent ng input value nagre-represent ng independent variable is x. So, that's why we interchange x and y. So, this is also the reason why we interchange x and y in our finding the inverse process. So, the process of finding the inverse. Okay, so let's now go to some of the applications. So, before we discuss the some of the mathematical applications, let us first go to our okay, so wala pala. Okay, so yung di ba, with the implementation of the K to 12, every student has their own learner reference number. So, this learner reference number is unique to each of the students. So, therefore, if I use this number to look for some information about the students, then if I input this number to a system, the system will retrieve all the related information tungkol sa estudyante na yon. So, this, likewise, dun din sa mga government services, for example, GSIS, meron din tayo ng private sector such as Social Security System, or sa BIR, yung TIN, yung binabayaran natin na buwis, meron tayo dyang mga account number. So, yung number na yon is unique to that user. So, if kung number ko ay 1, then 1 will only correspond to all the information that is related to me. Kung number mo ay, for example, kung ang number mo ay 21, so kapag nag-input ako ng 21 as an account number, for example, then ang lahat ng information na ma-retrieve ng naghahanap is the information related to that to the person owning that account number. So it is also evident in our biological compositions. For example, in our genetic composition sa DNA. So meron tayong sequence, 'di ba? So yung sequence natin which is defined by the nitrogenous base pairs. So yung guanine will always be paired to cytosine, adenine will always be paired to thymine. So in mathematical applications, ayan. So meron tayo. So inverse function is very evident in conversion process. So converting one units to another units. For example, converting temperature. So here, okay, so here class, we convert degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius. To convert degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius, we use this equation. So in real life applications, so for example in science there are a lot of inverse, there are a lot of concepts that is shows an application of inverses. So dito, 'di ba, degree Celsius and degree Fahrenheit. Kanina when we find for the inverse of a function, we interchange x and y. Pero in real life, hindi natin 'yon ginagawa. So this part, yung interchanging x and y is only done in pure mathematics when we are finding for the inverse of a function. But in real life, what we do is to look for the sequence of the process. For example, here, what we did here is first, ito yung ating, diba, yan yung given natin. So, you want to convert this given into degree Celsius. So, first, we subtract. So, sa parenthesis natin, PEMDAS. First, we subtract 32. So, second step natin is we multiply it by 5. And then, yung last step natin is divide it by 9. So, step 3 is divide by 9. So, ang rule dito is first in, last out. So, for example, di ba, kapag kayo lalabas ng bahay, ang una nyong, pag nagsapatos kayo, una nyong ilalagay is medyas, sunod sapatos. Pag uwi nyo sa bahay, una nyong tatanggalin is sapatos, sunod yung medyas. So, dito, ganun din sa mga real applications, real life applications ng ng inverses dito sa mga equations. So, kung first na ginawa natin si subtraction, ito dito sa equation na to, we subtract 32 followed by multiplied by 5 and then last is divide by 9. Dapat pagdating sa inverse nito, uunahin natin yung ito. So, yung last followed by this one. So, ito naman yung mauuna, followed by this one, and last yung ito. So, first in, last out. So, kapag ito yung una mong ginawa sa yung isa, to convert it to another, and therefore, pagdating sa naman, sa kabila, ito naman yung uunahin natin if we want to convert it back to the original value. So, let's use this information to convert this into so suppose na convert na natin siya into degree Celsius. So let us now convert this back to our let us now convert this back to degrees Fahrenheit. So lagay tayo ng blackboard. So again, so yung una natin ditong di ba? We have here degree Celsius is equal to 5 over 9 times degrees Fahrenheit minus 32. So, yung ginawa natin dito is 1, we subtract 32. Number 2, we multiply by 5. And step 3 mo dito, yan yung sequence natin ng operation. Divide natin by 9. Okay. So, by performing this, so by subtracting our degrees Fahrenheit by 32, multiplying it by 5 and then divided by 9, we will get we can convert degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius. So what about we want to convert degrees Celsius back to Fahrenheit? So anong dapat natin gawin? So here, so sabi natin first in, last out. So therefore, since last dapat ito na mangyari, ito yung uunahin natin. So step number 3, divide by 9. So ano ba ang inverse ng division? So ang inverse ng division is multiplication. So yung C, degrees Celsius, we multiply it by 9. So dito ko na ilagay kasi number and then some coefficients. So some variable pala, symbol. So 9 times degrees Celsius, kasi yan. So the inverse of division is multiplication. So ano yung sunod natin na gagawin? So dito, ang second step dito is multiplied. So followed by this step, or last step is this one. So multiplied by 5. So inverse ng multiplication is division. So divide by 5. And then since dito we subtract 2, we need to add 32. So this is now the equation for converting degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit. So to convert it, multiply. So kung makikita nyo din, ang mas makikita nyo is 9 divided by 5 times C plus 32. So ito ang uunahin nyo. Yan. So yan ang uunahin nyo to. Ito. So ang una, 9 times degrees Celsius divided by 5. And then plus 32. So this will convert the degrees Celsius back to degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so ayan na nga yung ating equation. So how about in Newton's second law? So this is also evidence sa ating Newton's laws of motion. Okay, so punta tayo sa ating blackboard. So we have here F is equal to ma. So kung hindi natin alam si acceleration, for example, pero given si force and si mass, so we can reverse engineer this by performing the inverse process of inversing. So here, since we multiplied acceleration by the mass to get the force, then ano ba ang dapat gawin natin to get the acceleration? So this is multiplication. Therefore, to get the acceleration, so F is equal to ma. So to get the value of acceleration, we need to divide our force with the mass. So A is equal to force divided by mass. So what about mass is unknown? Ayan. So what about mass is unknown? So here, okay, so force is equal to mass times acceleration. Then, so dito, since dito multiply natin, so again, ang inverse ng multiplication is division. So, we divide our force with the acceleration to get our value of mass. So, mass is equal to force divided by the acceleration. And there are a lot of applications na nakikita na natin yung inverses, yung concept of inverses. There are a lot of situations where we can apply inverses, especially in science, physics, or sa chemistry. Meron din siguro doon kasi may equations din sa chemistry, diba? So and other for example sa mga accountancy, diba? So meron din silang mathematics to solve for the growth of the money and costs for something related to finance. Okay, so next is application is the use of trigonometric functions, for example in vectors. Sa physics, di ba, meron kayong vectors. So, the use of trigonometric functions. So, this is one of the trigonometric functions. So, sine theta is equal to opposite divided by adjacent. For example, nawawala si opposite divided by the adjacent. So, for example, this is not adjacent, but opposite divided by hypotenuse. So, opposite divided by hypotenuse. So, for example, nawawala si opposite. So, hindi nyo alam yung value ng opposite side. So, what will you do? So, since we divide here, the inverse of division is multiplication. So, we multiply now this h to our sine theta. So, h sine theta is equal to the opposite side. So, the same din sa gagawin ninyo if nawala si h, if h is unknown, then yan, so ang gagawin niyo, derive lang din. So, dito, from this equation, so since dito multiplication naman sila, si h, yan, h sine theta is equal to opposite. So, since we want to know for the value of h, divide both sides with sine theta. So, sine theta. So, h is equal to opposite divided by sine theta. Yan. So, kung makikita nyo, yung process of inversing, so reversing the process of function is, kung sa application, it is the derivation of equations. So, that is one of the, inverse function is the core mathematics concept for deriving equations. So, to solve for the values, unknown values given some equations. So, this is the concept behind those derivations, inverses of operations. Okay, so you may try this. So, as your activity, you may try this and then go back here, play this again after answering para makita nyo yung sagot ninyo. So, our problem below is one of the 4 equations of kinematics used when looking for the value of displacement when the final velocity is unknown. So, given the following information, so we have distance which is equal to 25 meter, initial velocity equals to 0, and time is equal to 5 seconds. So, find the acceleration of the system. So, let us solve for our this problem. So, ang given natin, we have distance equal to 25 meters. We have initial velocity which is equal to 0. And we have time which is equal to 5 seconds. And we want to look for acceleration is unknown. So, sabi natin, d is equal to v sub o times t plus 1/2 a t squared. Ayan. So, how do we look for? So, ito yung gusto nating hanapin. So, we need to isolate this one. So, ano ba yung process dito? So, first, tignan nyo, kung merong addition, so between the expressions here, kung merong addition, yun muna yung una nyong gawin. So, since gusto nating iwan dito si A sa kabilang side, i-isolate si A. So, ito, meron tayong addition. So, itong expression na to, idilipat natin siya. We will transpose this to the other side. And since this is positive, therefore, ano ba ang inverse ng positive? That is negative. So, negative siya. Yan. So, kasi pwede na natin siyang isulat as 1/2 a t squared plus v sub o times t. So, therefore, if this is, by addition, therefore, kapag linipat natin sa kabila, the inverse of addition is subtraction. So, is equal to 1/2 a t squared. So, this is just the same by stating na ito. So, So, 80 squared divided by 2. So, since ito may division, ano ba ang inverse ng division is multiplication. So, therefore, we need to multiply 2 itong ating expression dito. So, d minus v of o times t times 2 is equal to a t squared. And then, ayan na. So, ito, we need to divide both sides. So, minultiply natin si acceleration by the time squared. Therefore, inverse ng multiplication is division. Divide both sides by t squared. So, therefore, acceleration is equal to 2d minus v sub o times t divided by t squared. So, 2 times d, so multiplication, distributive property of multiplication, 2 times d is 2d, and then ito, minus 2 v sub o t, divided by t squared. So, palitan na natin. So, meron na tayo ditong mga given values. Okay, so ito. So dito, since meron na tayo ditong equation, yan. So we substitute now with the given value. So 2 yan. So 2 times 25. Ito. So we have here 2 times 25 minus, so since ang v sub o natin is ano naman lang 0, so 0 times 5 times 2 is equal to 0 na yon. So t squared is 5 seconds squared. So now we have here a is equal to 50. Labas to. 50 divided by 5 squared is 25. So, doon ko na isulat sa kabila. Okay. So, dito na tayo. So, dito ko na isulat sa kabila. So, 50, acceleration now is 50 divided by 25 is equal to 2 meter per second squared. So, this is the acceleration. And this is our derived equation. Ayan. So, ito ang derived equation natin. So, yan yung inverse of one of the inverses. So, kung given a certain value is missing. Kasi, di ba, marami ditong variables. So, that is how we perform. That is how the inverse function plays in real situations. So we relate not just one variable to another variable. So there is a relationship between many variables. So depending sa kung anong nawawala, so we can relate this, we can relate the unknown to what is given. So yun. So, and we can undo the process to solve for any values that is unknown. So, I hope you learned something in this video. Goodbye class, and thank you.